Germany's election has just delivered a major shake-up, not just for Berlin, but for the whole of Europe. Friedrich Merz, the Conservative leader of the Christian Democrats, or CDU, is set to become Germany's next Chancellor at a time when Donald Trump and the transatlantic relationship with the United States is seemingly ending. So join me in this video as we break down what's happened, why it matters, and what could happen next, particularly in the context of Ukraine, and how Germany could be the key in a particular way you might not have thought of.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going? My name's Pyotr, this is the Global Gambit, and we've had one of the most important elections since, well, the countless others of 2024. But when it comes to the German election, there's one particular point I want to emphasize, which is that it could finally be, Germany's election could finally be the push Europe needs to fix its arguably biggest weakness: coordination and interoperability. Europe has the capacity to support Ukraine, but it's 40 different plus nations that have to consider and agree, especially when there are continued divisions amongst other countries, let alone within Germany itself. Unlike the United States, which operates as a single force, Europe's 28 national armies each have their own systems, strategies, and supply chains. This fragmentation weakens the continent's ability to respond to crises effectively. So if you have Germany, the largest economy and one of the most important in the world in terms of diplomatic influence, then that may well be a positive step for Germany and Europe as a whole. And it seems like we are here. It is clear Friedrich Merz, the head of the Christian Democrats, has won at about 29%. And with Donald Trump's latest comments calling NATO effectively, quote, obsolete, leaving Ukraine out of peace talks and openly dismissing European security, as we saw in the recent Munich Security Conference statements by J.D. Vance and even Pete Hegseth, it's becoming painfully obvious that the Americans, as we know them yesteryear, are no longer the reliable backstop. So what does this mean for Germany? The result, more specifically for Ukraine? Well, for the details on Ukraine, stick around for the end of the video and some of my more direct personal opinions. So to understand what's changing, we need to look at how things have worked out of the outgoing government. Chancellor Olaf Schulz, who built his brand as the so-called, quote, peace chancellor, was, to put it politely, reluctant when it came to arming Ukraine. While provisions were given intermittent periods, it was the slowness, the unwillingness to galvanize in a quicker rate that many people see as being one of the biggest weaknesses of the support and supplies to Ukraine in the early parts of the war. Schulz's government has hesitated on sending heavy weaponry, wavering on financial commitments, and only acted when immense pressure from allies left him no choice. That's not to say Berlin did nothing. Germany is now Ukraine's second largest military supplier after the US, but that support came in spite of Schulz, not because of him. His Social Democratic Party, or the SPD, was deeply divided, with many fearing escalation with Russia. And even with the ruling coalition, tensions between the SPD and the more hawkish Greens were constant. Now, though, with Merz in charge, that dynamic is certainly set to change. Now, it's very clear from the election results that the AfD, or the Alternative for Germany, which people see as the right-wing faction party, has grown significantly. They have dominated in the former socialist parts of Germany, spreading incrementally to the west. Looking at an election result map of Germany, and you can almost have travelled back in time to the Cold War, where an iron curtain has divided communist East Germany and the western part of Germany. In the east, it's a swathe of AfD light blue, apart from pockets like Berlin and half of Leipzig. In the west, the vast majority has turned conservative black, especially in Bavaria, where Merz's conservative sister party, the CSU, dominates the landscape. But it is not to deny the AfD is expanding westwards, and political loyalty to the old mainstream parties is eroding, as we have seen in the European elections last year as well. This was also the biggest voter turnout in 40 years. Not since 1987 has turnout been as high as 82% at the German election. 4 years ago, it was 76.6%, still incredibly high relative to countries such as the UK, but it reflects even more how energized Germans have been in this election and comes at a pivotal moment for the country. 9 TV debates in the final stretch of the campaign show just how energized the electorate was. Thirdly, there was also a collapse of the Schulz government. The three-party government of the outgoing chancellor fell apart at the end of last year, and within 24 hours of that Sunday election, all three leaders announced their departure, not just stepping back, as heads of government, but from overall frontline politics. The FDP's Christian Lindner, for example, a key figure in the coalition's demise, is stepping away from his party's failure to win any additional MPs. Schulz will remain in office as caretaker Prime Minister, President, Chancellor until a new government is formed, but he will not take part in any coalition talks. And the Greens' Vice Chancellor, Robert Habeck, is also leaving politics after their disappointing result. It seems most likely that the Christian Democrats will form a majority government with the SPD. The TikTok generation also revives the left. Until a few weeks ago, the Left Party, or Die Linke, seemed pretty doomed, as we've seen in similar places, notably France. But it seems to have made a stunning comeback thanks to an inspired social media campaign. Their co-chair, Hedek Rennick, went viral, defending, quote-unquote, the firewall against the AfD, gaining over 500,000 TikTok followers and 7 million viewers, helping secure nearly 9% of the vote just through that platform alone. It really does show you the insignificance and role that social media does play. To build on that, there is the generational divide. While older generations have stayed relatively centre, youngers, say under 30, 35, have gone to the left or to the right, similar to what we've seen in France and a few other countries in the European elections. Die Linke's viral campaign helped them secure a quarter of that 18 to 24 vote, while the AfD wasn't too far behind at 21%. Alice Weidel, the AS leader, became the biggest social media hit of the campaign, attracting more than 935,000 TikTok followers and having also been interviewed by Elon Musk, who some people see as interfering in the German election, on X. Thirdly, then, what exactly does Merz, the incoming chancellor, bring to the table? Well, he's not Schulz. For one, he's far more hawkish on Russia. He's openly called for a stronger European military, floated the idea of, well, even nuclear cooperation with the UK and France, and slammed, really not held back in slamming Schulz's government for its dithering, its fence-sitting on defence spending. The coalition of Merz is likely to form would be a game changer. Indeed, Merz has floated the idea of a new European defence alliance, even to potentially replace that of NATO. He is signalling that the foundation of Germany's post-World War II orientation is going to significantly change, move from that of more of a fence-sitting and to one that is much more decisive, assertive. And the fact that you're going to have what some people call a grand coalition with the SPD means that a government in combining these two will be much more stable. It will be less fractious in the case of power sharing across three different parties. And if Merz does require additional support for votes, then he can turn to the Greens, whose prominent Robert Habeck, as we have already mentioned, is one of the most hawkish on defence spending and supporting Ukraine. Merz said late last night that NATO summit in the summer will be where he begins to talk about NATO in its current form, or whether we will have to establish an independent European defence capability much more quickly, end quote. And this comes into play considering the Paris Forum, as it was colloquially known last Monday, where Macron hosted several important European delegates to discuss the need for more strategic and leadership by European nations without any input of the United States at all. Really signifies the times that we are now in. So in short, Berlin is about to get a significant backbone. Indeed, this is where I think it's important to share a little bit more of my own opinion. I think one of the most important things about the results of yesterday's election is you can argue it was a 20% win for the AfD, but equally it was an 80% rejection of the AfD. Germans are firmly not on the side of MAGA Americans. Americans who support Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and particularly commentators on X, have been celebrating and confident of the fact that Germany would follow through and do a sort of a Trump version. But clearly Germans don't feel that way. And the unexpected rise, arguably you can say that the AfD rise was something that we were anticipating, but the rise of the left party shows you that there is a desire amongst younger people to not just shift to the far right because there's more endorsement and input from the world's richest man, but just simply because they've had enough of the centre. When the centre and the establishment become less and less appealing, or people have less and less trust in it, they go to the fringes. There's a particular country at a particular time, say 100 years ago, where we can see this happening. Luckily, it isn't happening now. I have confidence in Frederick Merz, but it's going to be difficult to sustain that unless there is greater unity within Europe as a whole. Emmanuel Macron is now visiting, at the time of recording, Donald Trump, and then he will be followed by Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom. Both these leaders are going to have their own attempts and approaches to engaging Donald Trump. But what's clear is that transatlanticism, the transatlantic relationship, beyond just that of NATO, is, as one professor said on a live stream we recently had, on life support. And I think that this is one of the biggest challenges. Europe has the capacity. We have the desire, if we really think about it. What is the biggest challenge, I think, for Europe as a continent, as a collective, is its coordination, its interoperability. We need to make sure that we get an effective overarching approach, a combined and shared vision of what it is we want to have and where we want to see Europe go. If we don't have a concentrated effort to bring all our resources together, 500 million people of a market, of a population, one of the biggest collective economies in the world, and a very powerful one at that, then we're not going to get anywhere with managing and supporting Ukraine. This, the 3-year anniversary, February 24th, reminds us that Europe has had it very lucky in the past 2 to 3 decades, specifically. Ever since the collapse of the Cold War and the Berlin Wall as well, Europe has benefited from huge economic prosperity. But what we have not done is consider our own security, our own strategic autonomy. And that's made us extremely vulnerable. That's made us complacent. And I think that it is high time that we get not just more buzzwords, more statements, but actually concrete and committed policy from the leaders that we have re-elected or perhaps chosen for the first time. And they work together. And Germany is a forefront of that. With Germany now hopefully back on side and more committed, making decisions, even if they might not always be the best one, but not being unwilling to take risks, then maybe we can see some cohesion returning to Europe, not just across different countries themselves, but sub-regions. What I mean by that is that you have the Eastern European blocs who are much more hawkish against Vladimir Putin versus Western countries which don't feel that immediate threat. And then, of course, all of this being in the relationship to Ukraine and how much we can see Europe take the reins over from the internalizing, withdrawing United States. But what do you think about this? Do you think that Germany's election bodes well for Ukraine, or is it still too early to see? With Merz in charge, Berlin is likely to have a much stronger stance against Russia, push for that higher defense spending, and lead efforts to replace lost American support. Can it fully fill the gap of American presence? Perhaps not. But the challenges are immense and require collective approaches. And that's something that with a united Germany, united Europe, is still not far from impossible. Russia is ramping up its military production. Europe's armies are divided and underfunded. And far-right movements, economic struggles, and political infighting could all derail Germany's new approach. One thing is clear. Europe doesn't have any time to waste. And as Merz put it himself, the world out there won't wait for us. So if you enjoyed the video, then consider subscribing and giving it a like. I'll see you all in the next one. As we say on the Global Gambit, you've either got to get playing or we play. Take care, everyone.